Punishments for indecent acts aboard pirate ships. What happens when the world's rudest coworkers cram into a floating wooden tube with rum, weapons, and zero HR department? Spoiler, someone gets nailed to the mast, metaphorically, if they're lucky. Picture the early 1700s. Atlantic waves like angry mountains, governments chasing you with cannonballs, and a dozen languages yelling at once about who ate the last biscuit. Pirate ships weren't just chaos. They were fragile democracies where survival meant rules, and rules meant consequences. Indecent acts, whether sexual misconduct, harassment, or just being a walking disaster of boundaries, could explode a crew faster than a powder magazine. So pirates built their own legal systems, surprisingly strict, deeply ironic, and occasionally fairer than the societies they robbed. If dark history makes you feel like you need therapy with a copay from Netflix, do me a favor, hit subscribe so we can trauma bond weekly. I'll keep the rum jokes to a minimum and the awkward eye contact to a maximum. Number 10. Contract or cutlass. Imagine you're joining a pirate crew thinking it's an all-you-can-raid buffet, and the first thing they hand you isn't a dagger, it's a contract. Pirate articles spelled out exactly what counted as indecent sexual coercion, harassment, sneaking passengers, especially women, aboard without consent of the crew, or stirring up fights over who slept where and with whom. The logic was cold. Nothing wrecks morale like fear. On a ship, fear turns into mutiny, and mutiny turns into your funeral at sea level. So everyone swore to the articles, sometimes on a Bible, sometimes on pistols, sometimes on the captain's reputation. Break the clause about molesting anyone aboard. That wasn't cheeky wordplay. It ranged from unwanted touching to outright assault, and the penalties were savage lashes, marooning, or death, depending on the crew's vote and the article's wording. Pirates weren't moralists, they were investors in their own survival. Consent wasn't a virtue signal, it was hull integrity. Steal a kiss without asking. On land, you might get a slap. At sea, you might get a sentence read out over a drum, with the boatswain knotting a rope like it's your very last accessory. Basically, you signed the world's grimmest terms of service, and clicking "I agree" meant your skin. Number 9. Lights out, hands off. You think quiet hours in your dorm are strict? Try a pirate ship after sunset. Many crews enforce no candles after 8, unless you are on duty, because wood, tar, and open flame are a fire hazard in the same way a shark is a bit bitey. Darkness came with another rule: no sneaking into hammocks that weren't yours. A nighttime grope wasn't naughty, it was nuclear. In tight quarters, rumors move faster than rats. One accusation could divide the deck, and divided crews don't live long. If someone visited the wrong hammock, the punishment could be creative suspension from the yardarm for public shaming, lashings from both sides as you walked the length of the ship, or what some crews called Moses' Law, a run through a corridor of crewmen whipping you as you passed. The message wasn't be pure, it was be decent, or be destroyed. Even drinking pirate catnip got rationed, so people didn't lose judgment and accidentally cross lines. No one wanted to die because Larry got flirty after rum. It's amazing. Really, men who cheerfully stole nations' gold drew a hard line at creepy night crawling. The ocean's a harsh therapist, but she's big on boundaries. Number 8. No women aboard. Mostly. Let's talk hypocrisy with a splash of superstition. Plenty of pirate articles banned bringing women aboard. Official reason: a quarrel arise among them. Translation men will fight, harass, or worse. Unofficial reason: sailor folklore framed women as bad luck, which is wildly convenient when you don't want to admit your crew can't handle basic respect. The rule aimed to prevent the worst kinds of violence. because a ship can't be a floating crime scene and also do 12 knots. If someone smuggled a woman aboard, the crew convened a quick tribunal. Was she there by consent? Did she want to be on board? If not, the smuggler might face lashes, divvied rations, or marooning. If she was there willingly and the crew agreed, the articles might carve out exceptions rare, controversial, and tied to strict protections. Cross that line, intimidation, coercion, assault, and sentencing got lethal. Pirates were brutal, yes, but they grasped a truth institutions on land often missed. Safety isn't optional in a wooden world with no exits. So while the no women rule reads like medieval incel energy, it doubled as a crude firewall against abuse. Sure, it was sexist and superstitious. It was also a desperate attempt to keep a fragile society from imploding. Moral of the mast: if your workplace romance risks a cannon battle, it's not a romance, it's a court-martial waiting to happen. Number 7, Brotherhood Clause. Here's the awkward truth: for a group famous for earrings, lace, and flamboyant flags, pirate justice could be painfully prudish about sex between crew. Some articles used vague language like no indecent familiarities, which did heavy lifting covering harassment, coercion, and, depending on the crew's moral temperature, consensual hookups too. Why the ambiguity? Because on a ship where everyone sleeps within elbow range, private life is a myth. If two people's romance sparked jealousy or favoritism extra rations, cushier watches, suspicious rescues in battle that wasn't love, it was a fuse leading to mutiny. Punishments targeted the fallout, not the orientation. If the crew believed it was consensual and not disrupting order, you might get a stern warning, a fine from your share, or being reassigned bunks like it's medieval HR musical chairs. But if anyone cried coercion, or if relationships became a power play, officer pressuring a deckhand, for instance, then the hammer fell, lashings for scandal, irons until landfall, or the nuclear option a vote to maroon the offender with a jug of water and a pistol for company. Pirates didn't pretend to be moral guardians. They were chaos managers. The rule of thumb was brutal and simple: your desires end where the ship's safety begins. And the irony is thick as tar. The same men who toast to liberty would stage a courtroom drama on the quarterdeck over who put their hammock where. The ocean has a way of making hypocrisy look practical. You can be a freebooter and still get benched for drama. In other words, do what you want, came with a footnote the size of a cannon, as long as it doesn't sink us. Number 6, the whipping march. Imagine team building as a cardio workout, where the team builds itself on your spine. When a pirate was found guilty of indecent conduct groping a crewmate, stalking someone in the dark, mistaking bunks after rum, the sentence often involved a theatrical flogging, not just a few whacks, a ritual. The boatswain's mate produced a cat o' nine tails, a leather hydra designed by someone with unresolved issues, and the crew gathered to watch. The punishment wasn't only pain, it was public memory. The lash counted out justice like a metronome, each strike warning the rest, the body is not a suggestion box. Sometimes they added a promenade. You'd be tied and walk the length of the deck while each man took a swing, starting at the mainmast, ending at the mizzen, like a horrible cruise itinerary. For repeat offenders or particularly vile acts, salt and vinegar were rubbed into wounds under the medical theory of let's make it worse. So it gets better. And before you say barbaric, note the logic. The spectacle was cheaper than civil war. Fear did the job, locks couldn't. Of course, pirates were also accountants. Lashes could be swapped for fines docked from your plundered share. You'd carry the scar and the receipt. Crew leaders learned to calibrate pain enough to deter, not enough to destroy an able-bodied rigger. Dark punchline. On a pirate ship, even morality got budgeted. Line item 1, stop the creep. Line item 2, keep the labor force breathing. Number 5, desert island justice. If flogging was the warning email, marooning was the account deletion. When indecent acts crossed into violence assault, attempted rape, threats with a blade, some crews took a vote and chose the old Caribbean send-off beach. Bottle. Bullet. The ritual was chillingly tidy. You'd be rowed ashore with a little water, maybe a few biscuits, and one pistol. The single shot had a grim double-purpose signal, a passing ship, or end the hunger if no one came. It was a sentence with a timer and a prayer. Why so harsh? Because the ship had no prison, and grudges ferment faster than rum. Keep a predator aboard, and every night becomes Russian roulette with hammocks. Remove him, and you reclaim sleep, order, and the fragile democracy that keeps the cannons aligned. Sometimes, the crew left the marooned near a fishing inlet or on a quay, with scrub and turtles charitable in the way a delayed meteor is merciful. Survivors occasionally reappeared, leathery and furious, and that's when captains regretted not picking a more distant sand patch. There's a cold calculus in it on land. The powerful dodge consequences. At sea, community is the power. A deckhand's vote can strand a quartermaster. That's not just punishment. It's a social contract enforced by geography.
Signify not
The
a
ocean
path
doesn't
chosen,
do
but a
appeals.
choice removed.
Moral of the shore: if your desires require removing someone else's choice, the ship might remove you. Permanently. Number 4, Drumhead Court. Picture at noon, sun, tar boiling on the planks, and your crewmates forming a ragged circle that feels a lot like a throat closing. A drumhead court wasn't a metaphor. They literally used a drum as a table if one was handy. Charges for indecent acts got read aloud. Groping, threats, coercion, forcing yourself into a hammock you weren't invited to. And suddenly, the world's messiest democracy snapped into focus. No polished wigs, no Latin flourishes, just witnesses, scars, and a lot of salty vocabulary. Here's the brutal efficiency. The quartermaster acted like a prosecutor 1 minute and an ombudsman the next, because his job was the ship's balance food, powder, and peace. The accused spoke, the victim spoke, and so did anyone whose sleep or safety had been collateral damage. Pirates didn't care about morality theater. They cared whether the hull of trust was cracked. If trust was leaking and you were holding the hammer, congratulations, you were about to be the example. Sentences came by simple vote, hands raised like a storm of gulls. First-time creeps might get docked shares, swapped watches, or forced to apologize publicly, a humiliation almost worse than lashes when the whole ship knows your business and will remind you of it at breakfast. But if the story turned darker, knife used as persuasion, threats, or a pattern of stalking. The gavel was a rope, a whip, or a rowboat pointed toward a very lonely beach. There's a nasty honesty to it. The same crew that blasted frigates into splinters paused to argue consent and consequences because their lives depended on it. And the punchline's the shape of a cannonball. Pirate justice was quick and fair, the way surgery without anesthesia is efficient. It saved the ship, and that was the only metric that mattered. Number 3, a badge of shame. If you think HR writes warnings that sting, try punishments designed to travel with your face. Some crews preferred permanent reminders for indecent conduct branding on the shoulder, ears cropped to little half moons, or a scorched mark traced by a heated coin. It wasn't random cruelty, it was a shipping label for reputation. Step onto any dock with a branded bloom over your clavicle, and everyone knows you weren't unlucky, you were untrustworthy. The ritual started with the same grim theater verdict shouted over the wind. the boatswain heating iron like a sunset going vertical, and someone cracking a joke that made nobody laugh. Then came the hiss, the smell like pork and ship's tar had a baby, and the lesson you would carry into every port tavern until you died or invented turtlenecks. For lesser offenses, lecherous pestering, accidental touching, after rum, some crews shaved half the offender's head, dunked them in a barrel, or paraded them with a sign knotted around the neck, "Can't keep hands to himself." Piracy, meet performance art, but the cruelty had a practical brain. A branded man could still reef sails, fire guns, haul anchor. Killing him wasted a wage the ship had already invested in. So, the ship chose visibility, mark the danger, keep the labor. For repeat offenders, the brand turned into a ticket to Maroon City. Nobody wants to sleep above a powder magazine with a lit match who also thinks no is negotiable. Ironic punchline, pirates beat governments to the idea of public offender registries. Theirs just fit on a shoulder blade. And unlike a bureaucratic list, this one also knew how to tie a bowline. In other words, you can keep your rations, but you lost anonymity forever. Number 2, keelhaul confessional. Imagine you're invited to go swimming, attached to a rope, dragged under a hull lined with barnacles sharp as razors, while the ship keeps moving like a bored executioner with somewhere to be. Keel hauling wasn't a daily special, more like the nuclear dessert reserved for offenses that turned the ship into a haunted house. Sexual assault, especially with a knife or threat, could earn you the rope. The crew would strip you, bind your wrists, and run a line from one rail under the belly of the ship to the other. Someone said a prayer, someone else made a joke, so no one had to think about the screaming. You went under as the hull's crust bit skin like 1,000 tiny judges. If you were lucky, they pulled you fast and you only left a good portion of yourself on the wood. If they wanted a lesson carved into memory, they dragged slow lungs burning, salt drilling into wounds, time stretching like a rack. And yes, sometimes there was a merciful version dunked once, hauled up for air, dunked again. That wasn't kindness. It was pacing the horror so everyone had time to stare, calculate consequences, and file it under "let's never need this again." Why this for indecent acts? Because the crime wasn't just against one person, it split the hull of trust, and the hull is literally survival. Keel hauling punished the body while polishing the message. The ship is sacred space. You violate it, the ship's skin violates you back. The dark punchline? Pirates poster boys for anarchy ran a justice system where the ocean itself co-signed the verdict. In HR terms, corrective action plan, but make it hydrodynamic exfoliation. In human terms, choose consent or meet the underside. Number 1, the black spot of consent. No candles, no wigs, no judge, just a circle of men who bled together deciding whether you keep breathing. For indecent acts that detonated trust assault at knife point, repeated coercion, terrorizing hammocks, the crew might jump past lashes and brands to the endgame, the black spot. Sometimes it was literal, a piece of paper or cloth marked black, pressed into your hand like a farewell handshake. Sometimes it was symbolic of vote, so overwhelming the air felt blacked out. Either way, it meant you were finished on this ship, and probably on this planet. Execution methods varied like drink preferences, hanging from the yard arm, quick, public, brutal. Shot at dawn, the sea swallowing echo and body in the same breath. Or the most pirate version, marooned with a pistol and one shot, justice outsourced to chance and courage. The ritual had theater because theater teaches. The quartermaster laid out the charges. Witnesses recited the nights no one slept. The captain, who wasn't a king but a manager with cannons, asked the only question that mattered: can this ship ever be safe with you aboard? What makes it worse and weirder is the democracy of it. A deckhand could sink the fate of an officer. A cook's raised hand weighed as much as a gunner's. On land, power hides behind titles. At sea, power hides behind whether you'll wake to a blade at your throat. The moral math wasn't complicated. Your freedom ended where someone else's safety began. And if you didn't get that, you got the black spot. Irony for dessert. Men who stole empire's gold still believed in consent enough to kill for it. Turns out, the ocean is allergic to tyrants, especially the ones with wandering hands. If history teaches anything from these sodden courtrooms, it's this power without boundaries curdles into cruelty. And communities that want to survive will draw lines with knives if they have to. Pirate ships were floating contradictions, violent, democratic, superstitious, practical. But on consent, they were surprisingly modern. Your desire doesn't outrank someone else's safety. Today, we have policies and HR instead of cat-o'-nine-tails, but the stakes haven't changed. Workplaces still run on trust, bedrooms still run on yes, and the fastest way to sink a crew office or ocean is to treat people like plunder. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.